The Unknown by Riley Sager explained. Full plot summary, ending, twists and meaning. The Island mystery, ending, and real meaning. The Unknown is a psychological suspense and horror-tinged mystery novel by Riley Sager, published in the United States by Dutton on August 4, 2026. Penguin Random House lists the hardcover at 368 pages, while the UK edition was published by Hodder Stoughton. It is Sager's 10th thriller under the Riley Sager name. The author deliberately approached the novel as a celebration of his earlier work, describing it as his own version of an Eras tour, with settings, themes, and smaller references designed to echo previous novels without requiring newcomers to recognize them. The surface premise is pure gothic mystery. In 1926, 5 women supposedly vanished from New Avalon, a remote island on Lake Faraday in Vermont. All that remained were their dresses hanging from an enormous oak tree and a diary attributed to one of them, Daisy Rue. 100 years later, struggling actress Marin Keane arrives with a film cast intending to recreate the mystery. What follows is less a traditional ghost story than an elaborate collision between 3 competing narratives. What people believe happened in 1926, what appears to be happening on the island in 2026, and what several characters secretly need everyone else to believe. The big idea of the book. The central question in The Unknown is not simply whether ghosts exist. It is whether anybody can recognize truth when nearly everyone around them has a reason to manufacture a more useful version of reality. Marin is an actress. Ronan Peters is a director. Violet Wright is one of the most accomplished performers of her generation. Daisy's testimony reaches Marin through a diary. The historical legend has already been edited into folklore. The supposedly factual 1926 story is adapted into a screenplay. Later, cameras and recordings become evidence, weapons and bargaining chips. Sager therefore builds the mystery around performance itself. New Avalon initially seems frightening, because something supernatural may be watching the characters. By the conclusion, the more disturbing possibility is that human beings are perfectly capable of manufacturing supernatural terror when revenge, guilt, ambition, or self-preservation gives them sufficient reason. The story in one flow. Marin Keane gets the opportunity she has been waiting for. Marin Keane arrives at Lake Faraday, knowing that the opportunity awaiting her on New Avalon could change her life. She is not famous. She is the opposite. Her acting career has consisted largely of minor parts, including the sort of commercials and background roles that provide employment without providing recognition. Then director Ronan Peters unexpectedly casts her in Darkness, a film inspired by the New Avalon disappearances. The money matters. More importantly, the role matters. Marin is replacing another actress, Lindy Garrett, and discovers that she will not simply be playing a supporting character. She has been chosen to portray Daisy Rue, effectively making her the central figure in the film. Before Marin even reaches New Avalon, Lindy sends her a warning. She should not go there. Marin ignores it. That decision establishes one of the book's central pressures. Marin desperately wants the career she has never managed to secure, meaning almost every warning can be interpreted as something standing between her and the chance of finally becoming somebody. Official descriptions identify Marin as a struggling actress who unexpectedly lands a role in a major film about New Avalon and is required to spend a week on the island researching it. New Avalon has already become a story. The historical mystery Marin is supposed to recreate dates to 1926. New Avalon was believed to have been occupied by women involved with spiritualism and paranormal abilities. The most important surviving account supposedly belongs to Daisy Rue. According to the legend, 5 women disappeared. Their bodies were never recovered. Instead, 5 dresses were discovered hanging from the branches of an old oak tree. Daisy's surviving diary helped create the supernatural explanation. Something terrible was unleashed during a seance, after which the women vanished, one by one. That version of the mystery has survived for a century, precisely because it offers everything a legend needs: an isolated island, missing women, spiritualism, unexplained clothing hanging from a tree, and an apparently unfinished first-person account. The problem is that almost every element of that story will eventually prove less reliable than it initially appears. The cast enters the island. New Avalon is deliberately primitive. There is little of the infrastructure the actors are used to. Phones are surrendered. Electricity is absent or restricted. Contact with the mainland is limited. Ronan wants the actors to immerse themselves in the environment their characters supposedly experienced. The arrangement sounds like extreme method acting. It also makes the island an excellent trap. Marin meets the rest of the principal cast. There is Julianne Brown, an experienced actress with a strong theatrical background. Heather Benchley is more controlled and practical. Susie Hutchinson arrives with a different kind of celebrity history and an ability to irritate almost everybody around her. Most intimidating of all is Violet Wright, an acting legend whose presence immediately changes the emotional temperature of the group. Producer Loretta Zevrin controls much of the practical operation. Ronan occupies the center of the production as writer-director, charismatic, successful, and apparently convinced that this strange rehearsal exercise will produce something extraordinary. At the table read, Marin learns exactly how important her part is. Daisy is not merely another vanished woman. She is the lens through which the entire historical mystery has been understood. Daisy Rue's diary begins to take over the story. Sager alternates Marin's experience with sections drawn from Daisy's purported 1926 diary. Daisy describes arriving on New Avalon and meeting the other women around her. Mrs. Ruth Hume Semple appears to be an important figure within the group. Other women include Katrina Fisk, Jonquil Collins, and Mrs. Minifer. They appear to possess different spiritual or psychic abilities. Daisy believes she can communicate with the dead. At first, New Avalon offers the possibility of community. Daisy is surrounded by women who seem capable of understanding experiences the outside world would dismiss. Then the atmosphere changes. Symbols appear. The woods seem threatening. A strange force known as Azra becomes associated with the group's seances. During one session, the entity appears to communicate with them and warns Daisy that she will be the last. The diary increasingly reads like evidence of a supernatural catastrophe. That is exactly how Marin initially treats it. Marin discovers that Ronan has already changed the truth. Ronan gives Marin access to a transcript of Daisy's diary. It is invaluable to her as an actress. It also exposes an important problem. The historical diary does not contain a complete ending. Pages are missing, yet Darkness, Ronan's screenplay, does contain an ending. He has invented one. That detail may initially seem like a normal part of screenwriting. A filmmaker adapting an unsolved mystery has to decide what happened. Within the larger structure of the unknown, however, it is crucial. Ronan is not simply recreating historical evidence. He is filling its silences. He is transforming uncertainty into narrative. By the conclusion, almost everyone will be doing some variation of the same thing. The island begins behaving like the legend. The early incidents are ambiguous enough to dismiss. There are noises, shapes, disturbances in the night. Strange symbols have been carved into the island. Daisy wheels, or hexafoil markings, appear repeatedly, strengthening the impression that New Avalon possessed a ritualistic history. Then, a séance pushes events into more frightening territory. What begins as a piece of immersive preparation starts feeling dangerously convincing. The psychological effect is amplified because each person arrives carrying private grief and unresolved memories. Marin has one in particular. Her older sister Molly died when Marin was young. Marin was only 4 at the time. Molly drowned in a family swimming pool while Marin was nearby, and Marin has carried a distorted sense of responsibility into adulthood. She later believes she sees Molly outside her window. For somebody already living within an atmosphere of ghosts, seances, and historical disappearances, the experience is difficult to dismiss. The island has found Marin's most vulnerable memory, or somebody has. The outside world becomes harder to reach. A health emergency involving the people responsible for the group's transportation isolates the cast more completely, a development incorporated into the publisher's own description of the novel. Without ordinary communication, the actors can no longer simply leave when events become uncomfortable. That practical isolation matters more than the supernatural mythology. Once the characters believe they are stranded, every unexplained event becomes more threatening. The first rule of a convincing haunting is not producing a ghost. It is removing easy alternatives. Susie disappears. The tension changes dramatically when Susie vanishes. Now, the old legend has apparently begun repeating itself. Susie's belongings remain behind, strengthening the fear that she did not voluntarily leave. A dress associated with her appears at the oak. The symbolism is unmistakable. A century earlier, dresses were the evidence that the new Avalon women had disappeared. Now the same visual language is being used again. The group searches for her. Suspicion begins shifting between supernatural and human explanations. Ronan becomes an obvious person to question, because his behavior around Susie has already attracted attention. Marin knows he entered Susie's cottage. Ronan claims Susie tried to seduce him and that he rejected her. Then the group finds Susie's camcorder. The footage complicates matters rather than solving them. It shows interaction between Susie and Ronan, followed by additional material that suggests Susie was frightened and moving through the woods. The camera therefore does what written testimony has been doing throughout the novel. It appears to provide objective truth while only supplying another fragment. The pattern continues. More apparently supernatural incidents follow. Heather disappears. Her dress turns up at the oak. For the surviving characters, coincidence becomes increasingly difficult to accept. The old New Avalon story appears to be repeating itself almost perfectly. They begin openly considering the possibility that whatever Daisy encountered in 1926 has returned. Julianne interprets the force through a religious lens. Others connect it to loved ones they have lost. Marin finally admits that she has seen Molly. This is one of the psychologically important sections of the novel because Sager demonstrates how quickly a frightened group can collectively construct an explanation. Nobody needs definitive evidence of a supernatural entity. They only need enough individually unsettling experiences to reinforce one another. Fear becomes collaborative. Marin's guilt over Molly explains her vulnerability. The deeper truth about Molly matters because Marin has shaped her identity around guilt. As a child, she failed to check on her sister when she might have done so. Objectively, expecting a 4-year-old child to carry responsibility for an older sibling's drowning is unreasonable. Emotion does not operate objectively. Marin has therefore spent years turning a childhood tragedy into a private accusation against herself. Her desire to become a successful actress can be read partly as ambition and partly as escape. To be recognized by strangers would allow her to become something other than the girl defined by the worst thing that ever happened to her family. That longing becomes essential at the end. Marin does not merely want money. She wants transformation. Julianne disappears too. The apparent repetition continues with Julianne. At this point, New Avalon increasingly resembles the scenario described in Daisy's diary. Women disappear. The survivors become more frightened. The supernatural theory grows stronger precisely because events seem to be following an established script. That phrase, following a script, is the key. Marin eventually starts recognizing inconsistencies. The island may appear chaotic, but the events are strangely theatrical. They have timing, props, entrances, exits, and an audience. Marin discovers that some of the disappearances are false. The breakthrough comes when Marin discovers evidence that people believe to be missing are actually alive. The modern haunting is not what it appears. Susie and others have been participating in a coordinated deception. The mystery immediately changes genre. Until this moment, Marin has been trying to decide whether New Avalon is supernatural. Now she has to determine why a group of professional performers would create an elaborate fake haunting. The answer leads directly to Ronan. Elise Haynes is the real reason everyone is on the island. The apparent movie project conceals another purpose. The target is Ronan Peters. The women are not simply trying to scare him. They want something from him, a confession. The name connecting the conspirators is Elise Haynes. Ronan had a sexual encounter with Elise and recorded intimate material without her consent. He then shared it with other people. The humiliation and consequences devastated Elise, who later died by suicide. The people involved in the New Avalon scheme knew Elise from different parts of her life. Their presence on the island was therefore not accidental. They have assembled a cast around Ronan because the entire production is effectively a trap. Most importantly, Elise was Violet Wright's secret daughter. The legendary actress who appeared to be merely playing a woman from New Avalon has the deepest personal reason for wanting Ronan exposed. Suddenly, the choice of an elaborate haunted island scenario makes psychological sense. Ronan controls stories for a living. Violet and the others have built a story around him. They intend to frighten, confuse, and pressure him until he admits what he did. The movie was never really the point. The revelation reshapes Marin's understanding of almost everything that has happened. The limited budget, the isolated location, the supposedly immersive rehearsal, the confiscated phones, the staged disappearances, the dresses, the supernatural manifestations. Even Marin's recruitment now becomes suspicious. She thought she had received the break of her career. Instead, she has walked into somebody else's plan. The film Darkness exists primarily as the mechanism needed to place Ronan on New Avalon, under controlled conditions. Marin is therefore different from most of the participants. She is the genuine unknown. She was not originally part of the revenge conspiracy. That makes her simultaneously the most manipulated person on the island, and eventually, the person with enough distance to understand what is really happening. Daisy's missing pages produce another twist. Just as the modern mystery begins making sense, the historical mystery changes. Marin discovers missing material connected to Daisy's diary. The new pages suggest a shocking possibility. Daisy herself killed Mrs. Semple. The supposed victim of New Avalon may actually have been responsible for its violence. But that explanation still does not go far enough. The final truth is concealed elsewhere on the island. Marin finds Ruth Hume Semple. After further investigation, Marin discovers human remains beneath one of the structures. They belong to Mrs. Semple. With the remains is another journal. This document destroys the accepted history of New Avalon. The commune of 5 spiritually gifted women was not what later generations believed it to be. Mrs. Semple was experimenting with psychological treatment. Her patient was a woman named Ozra Kovacic. The figures Daisy believed surrounded her, Katrina, Jonquil, and Mrs. Minifer, did not exist as independent women in the way Daisy's diary presents them. They were products of Azra's fractured psychological reality. Daisy Rue herself was another identity. The famous mystery of the 5 vanished women was therefore built on a fundamental misunderstanding of what the surviving documents described. There had never been 5 separate women vanishing from the island in the manner legend claimed. A damaged mind, an unconventional treatment, unreliable testimony, and later folklore had combined to manufacture a far cleaner supernatural mystery. This is the novel's strongest structural reveal. The historical story and the modern story suddenly mirror each other. In both timelines, audiences believe they are watching several distinct events. In both cases, the visible narrative has been constructed. The final seance is designed to break Ronan. Even after Marin understands the modern conspiracy, the group proceeds toward its endgame. A final seance is staged. The intention is to force Ronan to confront what happened to Elise. Violet appears to become possessed. The name Daisy enters the performance. For a moment, even Marin is uncertain how much of what she is witnessing is acting. That uncertainty works because Violet is an exceptional actress. And because Marin has spent days being conditioned to believe New Avalon may contain something beyond rational explanation. Ronan is finally pressured into acknowledging what he did. The revenge plan appears to have succeeded. Then it moves beyond performance. Violet kills Ronan. Violet takes an ice pick and stabs Ronan. He dies. The crucial ambiguity concerns Violet's apparent mental state immediately afterwards. She seems confused. She behaves as though Daisy possessed her and committed the killing through her body. If that explanation were true, the supernatural story would suddenly return. But Marin now possesses information that makes the possession claim extremely difficult to believe. The Daisy described by legend was not a separate dead woman waiting to possess Violet. Daisy belonged to Azra's psychological history. Violet is performing again. The haunting has reached its ultimate purpose. A staged ghost story has become camouflage for a real murder. Marin helps cover up the death. This is where Marin stops being merely the manipulated outsider. She becomes morally involved. Rather than immediately exposing Violet, Marin helps move Ronan's body. They dispose of it in a way that can make his death appear accidental. That decision is essential to understanding Marin. Throughout the book, she is presented as somebody desperate to escape invisibility. Now she has information worth more than any audition. She has leverage over Violet Wright. The aspiring actress who began the novel powerless suddenly controls one of the most powerful performers in the industry. The historical truth is almost erased again. Mrs. Semple's journal could rewrite the mythology of New Avalon. Instead, Violet disposes of it in the lake. The physical evidence dissolves along with the possibility of a clean historical correction. That act completes one of Sager's most effective ideas. Truth does not automatically triumph because it has been discovered. Truth survives only if somebody preserves it. The island's original legend persisted because documents were incomplete. The new legend will persist because documents are deliberately destroyed. The unknown is therefore not simply the title of an old mystery. It describes a condition people actively create. Marin has kept her own evidence. Violet underestimates Marin. Susie's camcorder has provided another record. Marin retains the SD card. It contains evidence capable of connecting Violet to what really happened. Violet asks Marin what she wants. Marin's answer is brutally consistent with everything Sager has established about her. She wants to be known. Marin does not demand justice. She does not demand money in the ordinary sense. She demands access to the life she believes she should have had. The powerless actress turns evidence of murder into career leverage. The moral center of the book shifts one final time. Violet is not the only person willing to manipulate truth. Marin is simply better positioned to benefit from it. 4 years later, Marin gets everything she wanted. The closing section jumps forward 4 years. Marin is no longer unknown. She has built the career she dreamed about. She has major roles. She has industry prestige. She reaches the Academy Awards as a Best Actress contender. Violet remains part of that world. Ronan's death is publicly understood as an accident. The film Darkness was never produced. The people who participated in the island operation move on with varying degrees of career success. According to spoiler analyses of the ending, Susie capitalizes on the notoriety to some extent. Heather continues working in television. Julianne returns largely to theater. Brad remains in film production, and Lindy eventually leaves Hollywood. Marin, however, receives the greatest reward. Her silence has become currency. Daisy may have survived after all. The final historical wrinkle arrives when Marin continues investigating the past. She discovers a photograph from 1931. The woman pictured bears a striking resemblance to Daisy. She is identified as Zara McCutcheon, associated with a Canadian bootlegger. Marin interprets the photograph as evidence that the Daisy identity may have survived New Avalon. Azra did not necessarily end where the official story implied. A version of the woman could have escaped, crossed into another life, and adopted another name. The possibility remains deliberately less certain than Marin would like. After a novel about unstable evidence, photographs, diaries, films, performances, and manufactured stories, certainty would almost undermine the point. The historical mystery ends with another interpretation. Not proof. The main characters inside the story. Marin Keane. Marin initially appears to be Sager's classic vulnerable outsider. Ambitious, isolated, and placed somewhere where everyone else knows more than she does. Her defining desire is recognition. That sounds superficial until the book makes clear how much of her life has been shaped by guilt, disappointment, and professional invisibility. Marin also develops more agency than she initially seems to possess. When she discovers the conspiracy, she could expose it. When Ronan dies, she could tell the truth. When she obtains evidence against Violet, she could use it to pursue justice. Instead, she makes a transaction. That choice transforms her from witness into participant. Violet Wright. Violet begins as Hollywood royalty. Her reputation gives her enormous authority, while her acting ability makes her almost impossible to read. She later becomes the architect at the emotional center of the revenge plot. Once Elise is revealed to be her daughter, Violet's behavior acquires a motive powerful enough to explain the extraordinary plan. Yet Sager refuses to keep her comfortably within the role of grieving mother. Violet does not merely seek confession. She kills Ronan. Then she helps create a false version of his death. Her greatest talent, acting, becomes an instrument of violence and concealment. Ronan Peters. Ronan initially holds institutional power. He is the director. He chooses actors. He controls the screenplay. He determines which version of New Avalon will become a movie. The revenge plot reverses that arrangement. The director becomes the performer. The man accustomed to manipulating actresses is placed inside a production controlled by women who know more than he does. That inversion gives the novel much of its structural satisfaction even when the practical mechanics of the conspiracy strain credibility. Daisy Rue and Azra Kovacic. Daisy initially seems to be the classic tragic voice preserved in an old diary. The later revelation changes her function completely. She's not simply a historical character. She is evidence of the danger of mistaking a first-person narrative for objective reality. Through Daisy and Azra, Sager turns the historical plot into a warning about interpretation. A document can be authentic, while the conclusions drawn from it are wrong. Ruth Hume Semple. Semple becomes increasingly important because her hidden record provides an alternative explanation for the entire new Avalon legend. She represents the missing context. Daisy's diary tells one story. Semple's information tells another. The difference between them is the difference between testimony and explanation. The moment everything changes. The most important turn is not Ronan's death. It occurs earlier, when Marin discovers that the disappearing actors are not actually being taken by a supernatural force. That revelation changes the governing question. Before it, Marin asks, "What is haunting New Avalon?" After it, she has to ask, who created the haunting and why? The shift converts supernatural terror into conspiracy. Then the historical revelation about Daisy and Azra deepens the same idea. Both mysteries were misunderstood because observers accepted the visible narrative before understanding who created it. The ending explained. Ronan's death is the convergence point of the novel's two central subjects, revenge and performance. Violet constructs a supernatural explanation around herself, because New Avalon already provides one. She does not need to invent a new story. She only needs to step inside an existing myth. The fake possession gives her psychological and potentially legal distance from an act she has already decided Ronan deserves. Marin eventually understands that performance. But rather than destroy it, she joins it. Ronan's death becomes an accident. Violet remains free. Marin's career rises. The truth becomes privately known but publicly useless. A spoiler-focused breakdown of the ending similarly identifies Violet as Ronan's killer. Elise as Violet's secret daughter, the film project, as essentially a mechanism for the revenge plan, and Marin's retained recording as the leverage that binds her future to Violet. That is why the Oscar ending matters. Marin has achieved the dream established at the beginning. But the reader can no longer interpret success innocently. Every role, nomination, and flashbulb is connected to the silence she purchased with evidence of a killing. She wanted to become known. The irony is that becoming known requires keeping the most important things she knows secret. What the book is really about. Performance as power. Acting is not merely Marin's profession. Performance governs the entire novel. Ronan performs authority. Violet performs grief, possession, and innocence. The conspirators perform disappearances. Daisy's diary inadvertently performs a version of reality generated by Azra's fractured perception. Marin eventually performs the role of successful Hollywood actress, while withholding the truth about how she reached that position. The person who controls the convincing performance often controls what becomes reality for everyone else. The difference between evidence and truth. The novel is full of records, diaries, scripts, camcorder footage, photographs, confessions. None automatically creates truth. A diary can accurately record what somebody believes while still producing a false historical interpretation. A camera can capture an event while missing its context. A screenplay can fill gaps with invention until audiences forget which parts were invented. Sager repeatedly asks the reader to separate documentation from understanding. Ambition has a price. Marin's final choice gives the thriller its most cynical edge. She spends much of the book being used by more powerful people. When power finally reaches her hands, she does not reject the system. She uses it. That makes her more interesting than a conventional innocent survivor. New Avalon does not merely reveal everybody else's motives. It reveals hers, what most summaries miss. The cleverest structural connection in The Unknown is that its two mysteries are not simply parallel disappearances. They are parallel acts of misinterpretation. In 1926, incomplete evidence becomes supernatural folklore. In 2026, deliberately manufactured evidence makes a staged haunting appear real. In both cases, people construct a story first, and then make later evidence fit it. That makes the novel less about ghosts than epistemology, how people decide what counts as reality. The book also quietly refuses to treat Marin as morally superior merely because she was deceived. Once she possesses leverage, she uses it as aggressively as everyone else. that final corruption is necessary. Without it, The Unknown would merely be a revenge thriller in supernatural clothing. With it, the book becomes a story about people recognizing that reality is negotiable and deciding what they can get in exchange for negotiating it. What most people misunderstand. A simplistic reading is that the book eventually proves there was nothing supernatural on New Avalon. That is too neat. Most of the modern haunting is deliberately staged, and the historical mystery receives a psychological explanation. But Sager still leaves small spaces where absolute certainty is unavailable. The final Daisy-related discovery is deliberately suggestive rather than conclusive. Marin's experiences around Molly also matter emotionally, whether or not one interprets them literally. The novel therefore dismantles the supernatural explanation without completely removing mystery. Its final position is closer to this. Human beings create stories powerful enough to feel supernatural even when the machinery behind them is painfully human. The strongest scene, chapter, or idea. The strongest idea is the discovery of Semple's hidden journal and the reinterpretation of Daisy. It works because it does more than supply another twist. It forces the reader to reconstruct everything already accepted about the island. The 5 missing women are not merely victims whose killer was misidentified. The entire numerical structure of the mystery is unstable. That is a stronger reversal than revealing a conventional murderer, because it attacks the assumptions underneath the question itself. The best mystery twists do not simply answer the question. They reveal that the reader has been asking the wrong question. The tailored interpretation. The most useful way to understand The Unknown is as a story about narrative leverage. Everyone wants control over a story because controlling the story produces real-world power. Ronan controls films and therefore careers. Violet creates a haunting because she wants control over Ronan. Semple attempts to understand Ozra by recording and interpreting her behavior. Daisy records a reality she believes is true. Later generations convert that record into mythology. Marin eventually controls the most dangerous story of all. What really happened to Ronan? Her final victory is therefore not becoming a better actress. It is becoming the person who owns the version of events nobody else can afford to have released. That is much darker and much more interesting. Why this book still matters. Although The Unknown was published in 2026, its central anxiety extends well beyond the specific story. Modern culture produces more recorded material than any previous society. Video seems authoritative. Screenshots seem authoritative. Audio seems authoritative. Personal testimony seems authoritative. Yet evidence without context can still create completely false conclusions. Sager turns that problem into thriller mechanics. The diary does not lie in a straightforward sense. The camcorder does not lie. The photograph does not necessarily lie. People interpret them. People edit them. People suppress them. People decide what they prove. That distinction feels particularly relevant in an era increasingly dominated by fragmented digital evidence and competing narratives. If you only remember 3 ideas. The modern haunting is a performance. Most of what appears supernatural in the present-day story is an elaborate scheme designed to frighten Ronan and push him toward confessing what he did to Elise. The apparent ghost story is therefore a revenge operation disguised as paranormal recurrence. 2. The historical mystery is based on a false assumption. Daisy's diary does not describe 5 independent women disappearing in the straightforward way later generations believe. The revelation involving Ozra and Semple radically changes the interpretation of New Avalon. The legend survives because incomplete testimony became accepted history. 3. Marin does not escape the system, she learns to use it. Marin begins as the least powerful person in the story. By the ending, she possesses evidence capable of destroying Violet. She turns that knowledge into the career she always wanted. Her victory is therefore morally compromised rather than heroic. The sentence that explains the book. The Unknown is a thriller about what happens when the person who controls the most convincing version of events gains more power than the person who knows what actually happened. The real-life test. The novel offers a useful test whenever evidence appears conclusive. Ask 4 questions. Who created this record? What information is missing? Who benefits from the interpretation being offered? What would change if the same facts were placed inside a different story? Those questions apply far beyond murder mysteries. They matter in workplaces, politics, relationships, journalism, courtrooms, and online arguments. A document is evidence. It is not automatically explanation. A confident narrative is an interpretation. It is not automatically truth. And a person who seems certain may simply understand the power of certainty better than everybody else. 5 questions to test whether you understood the book. Why is Marin's desire to become known more important than simply describing her as ambitious? How does the truth about Daisy and Azra alter the meaning of the entire New Avalon legend, rather than merely solving one disappearance? Why does Violet's acting ability matter structurally as well as professionally? In what ways do Ronan, Violet, and Marin each use storytelling as a form of power? Does Marin ultimately defeat the system manipulating her? Or does she prove that she has learned how to participate in it? The final lesson. The darkest thing on New Avalon is not a ghost. It is the discovery that reality becomes surprisingly fragile when enough intelligent people have reasons to shape it. Ronan believes his position gives him control over other people's stories. Violet proves that she can construct a more powerful one. Marin survives both and discovers something even more valuable. Evidence allows her to choose which story reaches the outside world. She gets what she wanted. People know her name. But the final irony is brutal. The career that makes Marin visible depends upon keeping the truth invisible. That is where the unknown leaves its strongest mark. Not with the question of whether New Avalon was haunted. With the question of how many accepted truths are simply performances that nobody powerful has an incentive to correct.